Welcome in, everyone, to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, as always, Tommy Brzee. It is Friday, December 20th, the day of the CFP, and we have a ton to get to today. We're going to start talking about the month of December in college football. It's been a hot topic for probably the last couple of weeks in the world of college football. Want to break it down for you guys, give you guys a reason why it just has to be fixed one way or the other. Then we'll get to the transfer portal. We have about a million things to get to, so we'll fly through that relatively quickly. The biggest one of the bunch is John Mateer on his way to Oklahoma, but it was a little bit tougher than some of the Sooner fans thought it was going to be. Then we'll get to a couple of X factors that I have for this upcoming weekend for all of the teams playing this weekend. We did X factor players earlier in this week. Want to make sure I do just X factors overall for the team. We'll get to a couple of questions I have as we head in, including just how big of an advantage will home field be, and then we'll get to a little bit of a weekend roundup, and we'll talk about Carson Beck missing the rest of the year. We'll talk about the Diego Pavia verdict, a lot of different things that have happened throughout this week. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your question on the screen, we can have fun back and forth here, is to use that super chat. At the bottom of the chat on the Sports Network page, you can click that $sign, add any question, comment you'd like. It'll pop up on the screen, and we can have fun back and forth here. Definitely want this to be as interactive as possible, so utilize that. We can have fun back and forth, and always good for the both of us. But let's go ahead and jump into this thing, and let's talk about the December calendar, because it's a problem. I think we all understand at this point that it is a problem. It's been a problem for the last couple of years, but especially the last 2 years, it really has felt like it's been at the forefront of college football. A couple of players have had to leave their teams a little bit early for the playoff, especially with this year, and we're talking about Beau Pribula here. And that's kind of the center of this conversation. That's when this conversation, at least this year, when it really started to kick into high gear. We have the transfer portal coming alive. We have the CFP starting tonight at 8 p.m. We have a ton of coaches moving all over the place. We had signing day a couple of weeks ago. It's just too much stuff. It's too much stuff for all of these coaches. It's too much stuff for all of these players. And we'll start with Beau Pribula. We'll start with his case, because the reality is he was put in an impossible situation. Now, there are some other quarterbacks. Preston Stone, who looks like he could be on his way to Northwestern after this year, is staying with SMU for the playoff. All due respect to Preston Stone, he is not as hot of a commodity as Beau Pribula is. We'll talk about him here in a second in the transfer portal segment, because he's flying around to some big-time schools, and that's the reality of his situation. Was certain schools probably got in his ear, which is another issue we have to deal with, obviously, but most likely a couple of coaches, a couple of programs got in his ear, said, if you play in the playoff and get injured, your entire stock is going to go down. And if you play in the playoff and get beyond the semifinal, get to the final, or even get to the semifinal, the window's going to be closed. You're not going to have the ability to jump in, or you'll have the ability to jump in. Will there be a spot for you at one of these major universities that he's traveling around to, like Missouri, Ole Miss, UCF, a couple of these places that the reality is, if he didn't jump in when he did, the spots weren't going to be there, plain and simple. So it's going to be one of those situations where, kind of like Malik Murphy last year, where he had to leave Texas earlier than he probably wanted to, and earlier than almost definitely he wanted to, because that was the reality of the portal at that point. He got the job at Duke. He is now over at Oregon State. We'll talk about that in the next segment as well. But overall, it's a decision that you're putting these kids in just impossible situations. Multiple coaches have spoken about this, including James Franklin, about the issues that come from this, and we have to find a way to fix it. We have to find a way to make sure that these coaches can understand what's going on a daily basis, that these players aren't pushed to make decisions that they're not fully comfortable with, and that the fans don't lose the love that they have for this game. Because I don't know about you guys, but I've talked to a number of people throughout my life that have just said, it's getting a little bit tough to really enjoy my team year over year, because some of these kids just aren't staying for as long as you want them to. So it's one of those situations. We have to figure out the best way forward, that you put the kids in the best situation, but you also keep the product that we all love, which is these kids sticking around for as long as possible and being a part of teams growing through year to year. And other than that, leaving out the portal part of this, leaving out the players' rights, quote unquote, part of this, you're losing a lot of the love of bowl games. We had incredible bowl games, this one in particular between West Virginia and Memphis. They got after each other, and Hudson Clement made a ton of really big-time plays, and it was really, really cool to watch him kind of burst onto the scene like that. Not a lot of people know his name today, because not a lot of people were watching. Even West Virginia fans, they were probably a little bit more worried about what Rich Rod was doing in the portal than they were worried about that game. And I don't mean to call out West Virginia fans. This really does apply to just about everyone that's in the bowl game but not in the playoff. we have made it so that the playoff is the only thing that matters. Everyone put your energy there, and whatever happens in bowl season doesn't necessarily matter. Players are going to be moving around, coaches are going to be moving around. There's going to be no real reason for this stuff to be important, so don't care about it. And it's created a really, really bad idea around bowl season where a lot of these guys are lacing them up for the very last time. A lot of these guys are putting on that helmet for the very last time, whether that's for their college or just in general. A lot of these guys, wrap it up after this game, and they don't get necessarily nearly the love that they deserve or the respect that they deserve for getting to that moment. So I fully understand that a lot of this stuff definitely matters. The portal really matters for next year. What coaching hires you make matters. All of that stuff is a huge deal, but bowl games used to mean a ton, and I really want them to continue to mean a ton, and maybe it is, wishful thinking. Maybe it is too far down the path for us to get it back, but the reality is a lot of these kids are lacing them up for the last time, and they absolutely deserve to get a lot of the love that we're giving to a lot of the other players that are playing in the CFP, or some of the players that aren't even playing in bowl games, but they're moving around to new schools. They're getting all the love in the world, while a guy like Hudson Clement goes for over 100 yards in a bowl game, and no one really talks about it the next day. So that's another issue for me. I just want bowl games to mean a little bit more. I know it's a little bit of wishful thinking, but it can happen if we just all put our energy a little bit more towards that direction and fix some of the issues going on in the middle of bowl season. And you add on to this, you have recruiting that has to go on during this month, and a lot of it has been done. It was from the 4th to the 6th, so it wasn't necessarily like they were recruiting deep into December, but it's still a lot to handle. It's still a lot to juggle as you're getting ready for a conference title, as you're possibly getting ready for a playoff or a bowl game. It's a lot to juggle, and Tennessee is a team where, or Texas or Clemson or whoever is on has to go on the road this weekend or has to play at home this weekend, and they can't necessarily focus on all the other things that everyone else is focusing on because they had success. It doesn't make much sense to me. It's definitely a battle between like a million different people, and it won't necessarily be a clean solution. I can't promise that we're going to have this very, very clean break where we'll love everything about it, but something's got to change. So just to give you an idea of what the schedule actually looks like, what the calendar looks like in the month of December, I think the biggest thing to remember here is you start with National Signing Day. That is a multi-month, multi-year effort from a number of different people in that program, especially during the last 2 weeks. It's an absolute nightmare, an absolute frenzy to get all the guys that you need. So that's how you start the month. Then the portal opens the next Monday, after you've played a conference championship, or after, at the very least, you wishing to have played for a conference championship. That goes until the 28th, so it'll be done before the quarterfinals of the CFP. Then you have bowl season. That's smack dab right in the middle of that thing. You have CFP that's starting tonight and will run all the way throughout the next month, and then you have early enrollees that have to come in the first week of January. That's too much for the coaches to deal with. That's too much for the players to deal with. That's too much for the fans to deal with in a lot of respects, and you're losing a lot of fans because of it. We have to find a way to move forward where the coaches are on board, where the players are on board, and it makes sense for them, both from a perspective of we do want to put them in the best situation. We do want to give them a certain amount of power, but also we don't want to give them too much power, because the reality is that's what I feel like has happened in this sport, where we push all this energy over to giving all the kids the power and making sure that they have all the player rights that they could possibly want, and that's a great thing. But the reality is we haven't given them the tools to handle all of the power that we have given them, and it's put them in really bad situations, including Bo Pribula, including a couple of these other kids that are represented by people that just aren't agents, that just don't really know what the situation is or what the market is in this sport. So it has to change one way or the other. And how do we figure this out? What are some of the possible fixes for this? And one of the cleanest ones is just moving the portal window, finding a way to possibly just move it to the spring, have one portal window in the spring. And this has its pros and cons. You obviously would declutter December. It would make it a little bit easier to appreciate bowl games, to appreciate the CFP. You would still have movement for coaching hires and different things like that, but much less movement for sure. There's no doubt about that. But you would also have on the other side, on the on a pro side, the kids would know where they stand in the depth chart after spring camp. The coaches would know what they need in the depth chart in terms of, do we need to go get an extra running back? Do we need to go get a supplementary piece at wide receiver or a DB? All of that stuff would be known at that point, and you would avoid the academic calendar. Obviously, it's not ideal. These kids would not have necessarily quite the ability to jump in winter and then possibly jump back in spring, which is another kind of issue with this system. But the reality is we have to find a way to declutter the month of December the portal's probably the easiest way to do that. And there is some ideas, why are we worrying about the academic schedule at this point? Because, it's pretty much professional football, and I get that argument to a certain extent, but the second we stop worrying about the academic schedule, we're no longer playing college football. So it's a battle back and forth. It's going to be one of those things that people have a lot of arguments for or against it. I tend to be for the idea of just moving it all to the spring and just making it a very clean thing that, yes, some kids will be unhappy. Yes, some kids will have to sit out situations that they don't necessarily love for a couple of months, but then they'll be able to, exercise that right and move forward. But there are some other ideas that are out there, and this is one of the more interesting ones. Moving the bowl games to a possible preseason, to the month of August, and letting you play other teams from other conferences early in the year. Instead of at the very end of the year, you have the portal, you have all of that, but your season effectively ends at the end of the regular season, or if you go to the CFP, great. You continue on throughout the way. And it's interesting. It's one that I'm a little bit kind of on the fence about. I lean towards I'd rather not want this, if I'm being honest. I like bowl season. I like the energy that it brings, and I like the storylines that we have at the end of the year comparative to the beginning of the year. But at the end of the day, you also have a lot of implications to think about. What does this count towards your record once you get into the year? How will we create the matchups? Would it be based off last year, what we project for this year, and what are the scheduling implications for a team that plays on August 7th, and then they play a team in the first week that played on August 21st? Is that really fair? How would that work? That's a ton of other things to think about. And then on top of that, you have to worry about the academic schedule again. So a million things to think about with that respect. I think it's one of those ideas that it's a little bit more up pie in the sky than a lot of these other ones, but I do think there is a validity to it. I do think there is an ability to possibly make this happen and make it a relatively good product. I just would lean, moving the portal before I would move bowl games, my personal opinion. And then you could move signing day. That's another one to add. You could possibly move signing day to, you could add one in August where they could sign very early and be set up to enroll early in that school. You could keep the one in February, make that one a bigger one, and just have that one be the only one. This is a tough one. This is one that you're probably not going to get a lot of love from coaches about because they want to have their guys on campus early, and not a lot of guys are ready to sign in August. That's just kind of the reality of recruiting today, with a lot of the differences in the way that people work and the way that people operate. It's going to be really tough to get the players, to get the coaches, to get everyone to really sign on to this one. So this one's a little bit more far-fetched than the other two, but there's a solution here. That's the reality of the situation. There is a solution. The reality is also, I don't know what it is because it's so very convoluted. It's so tough to figure out all the different opinions and differing, wants and needs and desires of all the coaches and conferences and everything in between. So it's going to be a battle, but one way or the other, we have to fix this. We have to find a way to move forward in the month of December without these coaches complaining every 2 weeks and without these coaches having to worry about anything but getting their guys ready to play the biggest game of their life. So a lot of different things to think about in the month of December, a lot of different things that need to be moved around, and a lot of things that can really help out a lot of these players and coaches that are struggling right now. But we'll get there. I tend to believe we'll get there. Hopefully we'll get there at the by next year, but if we don't, we'll just continue to fight. We'll hopefully find a solution at some point or another, whether that's moving bowl games to the preseason, moving the transfer portal, playing around with some of the different, contracts and different things in the sport. There are some solutions. It's just going to take a little bit to get there. But we'll break it down as it does, obviously. But let's take our first break here. And when we come back, we got a million things to talk about from the transfer portal. We'll talk about John Mateer. We'll talk about Malik Murphy. We'll talk about CJ Daniels and a million other players right after this, so stick with us.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign.
I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing sold out shows where 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the month of December and how the calendar is just all types of screwed up, and they're going to have to find a way to fix it one way or the other, and hopefully it'll happen this offseason. Definitely a lot of hurdles to get over to get there, but let's get into the portal. We have about a million things to get to. We obviously have not talked about this since Monday, so a lot of stuff has happened since then, and let's go ahead and jump in here, and we'll start with one of the biggest names in the portal right about now, or I guess no longer in the portal. John Mateer, he is officially committed to Oklahoma. Sounded like this was a battle. It sounded like this was a little bit of an NIL battle with Miami, as well as North Carolina. And it sounds like North Carolina might have had the biggest number on the table. So, remarkable stuff from Bill Belichick to try to push for this one. He officially decided to reunite with Ben Arbuckle, his former offensive coordinator. This guy is a downright Heisman contender. If they can figure out that wide receiver position and that O-line position, especially at Oklahoma, this guy is as dangerous as anyone in the country, and he could do some really, really special things in 2025, but gives you an idea of what UNC is doing on the portal. They have a little bit more means than maybe even I thought they did, but remarkable stuff from Oklahoma to lock this one down, especially battling those two schools that they were. Luke Kromenhoek, Mississippi State has their quarterback, and I think it's a fantastic fit. I think him and Jeff Lebby fit together really, really well. He can make all the throws in the world, and hopefully he'll be there for the next 2 to 3 years. He's a very talented kid, and if Mississippi State can build around this kid for the next 2-3 years, could be a really, really good program by the time he leaves. Caden Salter, Colorado has their quarterback, and Juju Lewis is coming in as well, the very talented freshman that signed there a little bit ago. I tend to think he will not be fully ready right away. I tend to believe this will be your starter for Colorado going into next year. Can't promise that. Obviously, Julian Lewis will have plenty to say about that, but I think it's a great pickup. I don't think Julian Lewis will be all the way there in his very first year, and I think Caden Salter is a very talented kid. Obviously, had a relatively tough year. Some of that is injury, some of that is some different things, but overall, very talented kid and definitely someone that I tend to believe will be the starter taking over for Shedeur Sanders around Boulder. Malik Murphy, this was an interesting situation around him. He is off to Corvallis. He will be at Oregon State Beaver this next year, and a little bit of a surprise, especially after Miami missed on a number of guys. I thought they could possibly slide in for this kid, but sounds like the situation between him and Duke was a little bit more Duke's decision than what was his. You hate to see it happen, but happens about once a year, happens more than that, happens a couple of times a year where a player is, I don't want to say asked to leave, but encouraged to find another place to play, and Duke has found their new guy in Darian Mensah. It worked out relatively for everyone, but Oregon State has a very, very good quarterback in Malik Murphy, and he'll definitely be able to shine for the Beavers. Noah Fifita, for the second year in a row, Arizona State has been able to hold on to Noah Fifita with a ton of portal talk. He officially is coming back to Arizona, and you badly need it. You still have a ton of outgoing talent, and you were able to get Dalton Johnson back in, a couple other players, so Brent Brennan is doing the best of his ability to get a lot of these talented players back in the building, but he's going to have to go get a couple of guys, especially at the wide receiver position. When you lose a guy like T-Mac, you're definitely going to need some help there. So a lot of work still to do, but this is a huge piece that they're keeping in Tucson, Arizona. TJ Finley, very, very talented guy. Very, very talented kid. And Miles, I do not know, if I'm being totally honest. I was about to talk about him here in a second, but I can check that here in a second, and we'll see if he actually did. I know it's leaning that direction, though, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But TJ Finley, he will be the replacement for Darian Mensah over there at Tulane. Really solid pickup, very experienced quarterback. I wouldn't be surprised if they went out and found another one, if I'm being honest, but very talented kid and could very well be the starter for John Sumrall in 2025. Nick Anderson, he is going to LSU. LSU just continues to roll. We'll talk about them in a little bit more detail here in a second, but this wide receiver group with Barry and Brown and a lot of these other talented guys could be one of the best groups in the entire country. Really talented kid. If he is on the field and healthy, he's going to make all the difference in the world. CJ Daniels, speaking of LSU, CJ Daniels is making his way out of Baton Rouge and down to Coral Gables, Miami, and they badly need it. They need it because Isaiah Horton is making his way out. We'll talk about him here in a second. A couple of teams in the SEC that are firmly in for him, but a big-time pickup here. Hopefully he can get back to that Liberty level of play that he was playing at a couple of years ago. J. Michael Sturdivant, another piece for DJ Lagway over there at Florida, and you badly need it. A big-time 50-50 ball guy. You add him to guys like Eugene Wilson, and we'll talk about Dallas Wilson at the end of the show, but a lot of really talented receivers coming over to Florida, and this is a big-time player for them to get. And also this one is one of my favorite pickups of the entire cycle. Georgia Tech picks up Eric Rivers, a top 5 receiving yards player, over 1,000 yards for FIU last year. Very talented, very shifty, very fast. A great replacement for Eric Singleton as you can get them. Obviously, probably not going to replace everything that Singleton gave them, but very talented guy nonetheless. USC needed this one. They lock up Keyshawn Silver, a very talented defensive tackle. Massive win for DeAnton Lynn and that defensive staff. This is a immediate big impact player and definitely someone that USC just needed. They are bleeding right now, and they were able to get a player that is immediately going to be an impact guy for them. Jaheim Otis, Colorado has their anchor. They have the guy in the middle of that defense that can hold everything down. This is a true NFL talent at defensive tackle. A big 300-pound guy that can make all types of plays. He is going to be a huge player for them, especially with a couple of the guys walking out the door from that talented defense this year. Definitely need someone in the middle there, and they officially got one. Clemson did it. They did it again. It was not a mistake the first time around. They are going into the portal, and it will help this time around. Very talented, very rangy edge rusher from Purdue. Clemson, this is a huge pickup for them and definitely makes their pass rush terrifying going into 2025. Cameron Calhoun, very talented cornerback, from Utah, formerly played at Michigan. He is making his way to Alabama. They badly needed this piece because Devontae Smith, the very talented nickelback for them, is making his way up to Notre Dame. Big time pickup for Notre Dame, especially with a guy like Xavier Watts walking out the door. It'll be interesting to see what Alabama does at that nickel position and how Devontae Smith kind of fits into that defensive game plan for Notre Dame next year. Josiah Trotter, big-time get for Missouri here. This was definitely one that West Virginia was really, really trying to get back on the campus after Rich Rodriguez took the job. They weren't quite able to. Missouri was able to get that one, but remarkable player and definitely a huge middle linebacker for them in 2025. Texas Tech, what is happening over there? They're getting just about every single player they could want. I believe they have 16 different players right now. The top class in the portal got Romello Height from Georgia Tech, got Lee Hunter from UCF, just got Quentin Joyner yesterday from USC. Really, really talented players coming into Lubbock, and he's doing exactly what he needs to do. He's upgrading the talent there and could be a dangerous team in 2025. I really love what Wisconsin's doing the past couple of days. They picked up Billy Edwards, a really talented quarterback from Maryland that probably was a little bit underappreciated this year. They also got some pass catchers. Tanner Koziel from Ball State, very good tight end, and Jaden Ballard, a very talented wide receiver from Ohio State. Never quite found the field, but a very talented guy nonetheless. 4-star coming out of high school. Definitely some upgrades at positions that they badly need over there in Madison. And LSU, we said we would talk about them along with Nick Anderson. They got Destin Hill to add to that wide receiver room, very talented kid from Florida State. And then they also got Mansour Deline, a huge safety from Virginia Tech, Jack Pryburn, edge from Florida, and they're really heating up for that Texas defensive tackle, Sadir Mitchell, that played around with the portal like it was a little bit of a jump rope, but he is officially in. Looks like he could be finding his way to Baton Rouge with his former coach in Bo Davis. Patrick Payton, newly in the portal. This is kind of an intel little segment. It looks like LSU is leading here as well, which would be an absolutely huge get for them. They've done a great job getting some supplemental pieces at that edge rushing position, like Jack Pryburn, like Deshaun Womack. This would be their game record. This would be the guy that would totally change this thing for them and would be an incredible thing to watch. The Jalen Mbakwe story was a very short but a very weird saga. He entered. There were rumors of Ole Miss offering a seven-figure offer on the fly, and then he returned to Bama, and it sounds like he could be playing both ways next year. Very, very talented, very intense player, and absolutely can play some wide receiver for them if they need to. It'll be interesting to see how this develops into next year, and if he is the next Travis Hunter in the world of college football. Jalen Catalon, very talented, very experienced player out of UNLV, played at Arkansas, played at Texas, could go back with Barry Odom to Purdue. He has obviously been with him for a lot of his career, so could be a natural landing point there, but definitely a guy that a lot of people will be after, especially some of those SEC teams. Bo Pribula, the big story of this past weekend, he has made his way to Iowa, Missouri, I believe Ole Miss, I believe Indiana. He's going to make his way to UCF here pretty soon. I would lean Missouri right now. Ole Miss will obviously have something to say here, but plenty of teams that are very much in for him. I think Indiana might be Fernando Mendoza territory. A lot of different things flying around, as you can imagine, and we'll talk about that guy right now, Miles, and we'll see if he has committed. I'll just go over here, see if I can do this pretty normally and efficiently over here, but very talented kid nonetheless, someone out of Georgia Tech, and it does look like, regardless if he has committed or not, it does look like he has. There's been a number of different reports, and we'll see if there's a little bit more for sure thing. I've seen a couple of different tweets out there. Definitely something that I expect to happen today. So if it has happened, not necessarily overly surprising. Very talented kid, someone they very badly need over there at Auburn. A little bit surprised, honestly, if I'm being honest, considering the other teams that were in for him. But at the end of the day, a huge pickup for Auburn, and definitely a guy that can be their number one wide receiver right next to Cam Coleman next year. Zachariah Branch and Zion Branch have made a lot of different headlines over the last couple of days. He entered, both of them entered as a with no contact tags, which essentially just means either two things, really, is what it means. Either a team has already called them and they have made their decision, or they're going to reach out to teams. They have a couple of teams in mind, and that's the way they're going to go about business. It sounds like it's more of the latter in this scenario, and it sounds like Washington, Texas, and Georgia are the three to really keep an eye out on. Sounds like he could be making his way to Athens here pretty soon. Would be a huge pickup for Georgia, along with a couple of the other receivers, and we'll talk about one of them here in a second. I think Texas might be the best fit here, but also Washington would make a lot of sense with Jedd Fisch. But at the end of the day, it sounds like it's going to be his decision to make, and it'll be interesting to see where he ends up. Dane Key, a huge pickup if Georgia were going to be able to do this one. It sounds like it is going to be theirs to lose. Very talented wide receiver. I'm a huge fan of what Dane Key can do on the outside, and I think he could be wide receiver one for Georgia. I would expect a commitment here, if I'm being honest. I would expect one relatively quickly. Could be this weekend. Very talented kid, and definitely a guy that Georgia badly needs in that wide receiver room. And then Isaiah Horton. We talked about him a little bit earlier. Very talented Miami wide receiver that was floating with the portal for quite some time. He has officially jumped in. Sounds like Georgia and A&M are two to watch here. Alabama as well in here. That they actually might be the leader in this situation. So I would expect Alabama. I think you'll probably hear from A&M, but I would bet that Alabama probably wins out on this one relatively quickly, if I had to imagine. And just to give you an idea of where we stand, after all of that craziness, and Eric Singleton might be knocked off this list here in a second, but Patrick Payton is leading the way for all of the available players. Zachariah Branch, Deuce Robinson. Deuce Robinson sounds like Arizona State is in there. Sounds like Louisville is also involved. A couple other teams to definitely keep an eye out on there. Fernando Mendoza, we talked about it. Feels like that's Indiana. There could be a couple other teams that are in for him, but definitely something to watch. Tacario Davis. It sounds like the NFL draft is calling his name a little bit more aggressively than the portal is right now, so it sounds like he's leaning that direction. Could expect a decision there pretty soon. And then Casey Concepcion, he's making his rounds, going to Colorado, going to a number of places. I'd lean toward the Buffs right now, but a lot of different teams that are still trying to make ground up in that situation. So a lot of things have happened. As you can imagine, there are a million different things that will happen over the next couple of days. As Miles told me right here, Eric Singleton could be committed to Auburn, and we could have that one locked in, so that would be a huge pickup for the Tigers. We will obviously update you on everything that you need to know at the start of next week, but we'll take our second break here. We'll move on from the portal for the time being, and we will move forward to a couple of X factors for the teams that are playing this weekend. We'll go, what is the X factor, or maybe question, as we head into this upcoming weekend, as we head into the first round games? What is the most important part for all of these teams? We'll break it down right after this.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the transfer portal and just checked Twitter a little bit more thoroughly. Looks like Eric Singleton or Hayes Fawcett has not posted anything in particular about him. I assume that will be coming pretty soon. A couple of different reports out there, but nothing I feel overly confident in right this second. So we'll update you on that in time, possibly at the end of the show. We'll have an update there, but a lot of different things happening around the portal, as you can imagine. Let's get into a couple of X factors. For these first round games, I have a couple of things that are either questions as I head in or just X factors for the game as we head in. And we'll start with the game that's going on tonight up there in South Bend that could get a little bit snowy, and we'll talk about that in the last segment, or in the next segment. But the X factor is just a consistent pass game. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything special. It doesn't necessarily need to be anything explosive. It needs to be consistent. It needs to be something that they have to think about, because the reality is Indiana only gives up 76 yards per game on the ground. They are the best run defense in the entire country statistically, and they are going to be a really, really tough team to get everything you want to get going. And Notre Dame is incredible at running the ball. They're one of the best run games in the entire country, maybe the very best. But the reality is, you're not going to have quite as much room as you've had against a couple of the other opponents you played, even the one you played a couple of weeks ago against USC. You're not going to have as much room. It's going to have to be guys like Bo Collins, Jaden Greathouse, Mitchell Evans, a couple of these guys just making some big plays, whether that's down the field or for a 5-yard gain on 3rd and 7, for a 7-yard gain on 3rd and 7 ideally. But if you're trying to just move down the field, you need Riley Leonard to hit his spots. You need mistakes not to come in. There's been a lot of different things, a lot of different questions about this Notre Dame team. The biggest one has been, can they come back? If they get down 14, if they get down 10 in this game, do they have the consistent pass game to get back into the game, or will they just kind of crumble under the pressure? It's a huge, huge question heading into this one, and if they want to beat Indiana tonight, they're going to need some type of consistent pass game to at least get that Indiana defense that can stop your run game at least thinking about the pass game on the back end. Explosive pass plays on the other side. I don't think it's necessarily just consistency. I think they got to go downfield, and the problem is it's snowing quite a bit up there in South Bend right now. I don't know if that will continue into kickoff. It sounds like there could be some flurries as we get into kickoff, but that definitely does hurt this just a little bit. But according to PFF, in the USC game, Christian Gray gave up 130 yards and 2 scores. That is where you attack. That is the place that they are going to attack over and over and over again, and they're probably going to attack him with that guy right there, with Elijah Surratt. He's a big-time 50-50 ball guy. He's a guy that is going to be an absolute nightmare to deal with for just about any corner on the field, but especially a couple of these guys filling in for Benjamin Morrison. He's going to be a huge player in this game. And Curtis Rourke has been great at throwing these balls this season. He is 22 for 46, 745 yards, 8 touchdowns, and only 2 picks on passes over 20 yards. That is absolutely elite and could be the difference maker tonight. If they can make a couple of plays, especially early in this one, this game could change very, very quickly, and Indiana could be moving on to the quarterfinals to face off against Georgia. For Penn State, it's the wide receiver difference makers. You're going to need some on Saturday against this SMU group because, for whatever reason, people do not believe that this SMU defense is good. For some reason, people believe that it's all just because they were in the ACC. The reality is, their linebacker duo might be the very best in this entire tournament. They are absolutely elite in every way. Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker are problems. They are going to be absolute beasts in the interior of this defense, and the defensive line can get after some people. I get Penn State is going to have the size advantage. They will definitely have it. I don't know if it's going to mean all that much against this really aggressive, really intense SMU defense, so they need players on the outside. This can be Omari Evans, who made a big-time catch in the Big Ten Championship. Harrison Wallace, likely been the most consistent player on the outside for them all season. Liam Clifford obviously needs to be a player that steps up here and there. Because the reality is Penn State running the ball is not going to get them a comfortable win here. It might get you a win. You might be able to sneak away with a little bit of a 23-20 win or something like that. It's not going to be pretty, and it's going to be very, very nerve-wracking. And then you're going to go to play a team in Boise State that is going to be able to slow the ball down as well. And if you run the ball there, one mistake can make a difference in that game. So having Tyler Warren obviously makes this easier. It takes a lot of the pressure off the wide receivers, but you're probably going to be playing one of the top 3 defenses that you've played all year on Saturday, and you're going to need players on the outside to just make some plays here and there throughout this game, or it could get a little bit ugly, and that's probably exactly what SMU wants. But On the other side, SMU, if you can't protect the passer, you're going to have a very, very bad problem because this Penn State up front is absolutely terrifying. They have 4 guys with at least 3 sacks on the year. Obviously, Abdul Carter leading the way with 10, but remarkably good group up front for Penn State. It is a solid group up front for SMU as well. They did a good job against Clemson last week, had a couple of pressures early, had a couple of leaks early in the game, but had done a great job. It sounds like Savion Byrd and PJ Williams are going to be huge in this game. Those are the 2 tackles for SMU, and if they can't hold up against the speed, against this power of the pass rush, it's going to be a nightmare. And the Penn State back end really did struggle with the speed that Oregon does have. SMU has some of that speed as well. If they can get protection for Kevin Jennings, if they can get the ball on the outside and let these guys make plays, it could be a game where SMU puts up some points even in the cold, even in all the crazy elements up there. It feels like one of those things where if you give Kevin Jennings time, if you give him openings, he can totally change this game. Then you have Texas. You have the game that's coming up right after that one. Red zone offense is the plain and simple way that Texas is either going to win a national title or lose on Saturday. Those are the one thing that could make the entire difference. Now, it could be a number of different things that kind of come into this, whether it's, Quinn Ewers getting a little bit more healthy, Arch Manning playing a little bit more, Clemson not necessarily all that great on defense when it comes into the red zone. So overall, you have a lot of things kind of heading in your direction in this game. You still got to execute. So you could see a little bit more Arch Manning here. He gives them a little bit more of that run game. He's a little bit stronger of a passer in terms of arm strength, so he can fit it into those small windows. He does throw that fade route really, really incredibly well. There's a number of different things that you could kind of add here. A lot of people have said, just have him be the red zone quarterback. I think that's a little bit far-fetched, but overall, I do think it's an idea that you're probably going to have to utilize him just a little bit more and see what happens on the back end. And Anthony, you bring up a good point. It could just be spying that guy. It could just be Kobe King waiting for Kevin Jennings to leave the pocket and then trying to run him down pretty much all game. It's going to be a battle, but one way or the other, if Kevin Jennings has time, he's going to have time to change this one for sure. On the other side for Texas, Clemson has a running back problem, just plain and simple. Phil Mafah will not be 100% for this game. It sounds like he'll be a little bit closer to 100% than he was in the ACC Championship, but he is nursing a shoulder injury. It sounds like Jay Haynes is out for the year with an ACL tear, which is absolutely terrible. You hate to see a guy go down, especially in this time of the year, but sounds like it's going to be Keith Adams Jr., who has not had a carry since the Citadel game. David Iziumi, 10 carries on the year, and Jarvis Green, who only has 7 carries on the year. You're going to have to find a way to rotate these guys in. It has to be Phil Mafah. He's going to have to tough it out just a little bit as the lead back here, but you got to give him some breaks. He's not going to be able to hold up, especially against this really aggressive Texas defense, if you make him go out there and have 25 carries in this game. And Cade Klubnik can make a lot of plays. He can't make all the plays, especially against this linebacker group. He is not going to be able to make all the plays with his legs that he's always capable of making. You're going to have to get the conventional run game going some way or another, and it really just comes down to rotating these guys in, making sure that everyone is fresh, and making sure that your number 7, the big guy up front, Phil Mafah, is feeling as good as he can be going into that fourth quarter. Ohio State, it's very, very simple. If their O-line plays well, they will win this game. If they do not play well, they will lose. Plain and simple. And the Tennessee D-line, it might not be outright better than Michigan, but it's very close. And I might just lean Tennessee's direction in terms of which D-line is a little bit better. It's definitely the best D-line in the entire CFP field. And we saw what happened when Michigan played Ohio State. They got Michigan absolutely manhandled this offensive line, and they have to find a way to right that ship. And it comes down to Donovan Jackson locking down that left tackle position against some of the pass rushers that Tennessee has, especially James Pierce Jr., and then Carson Hinsman, Austin Saravel holding up in the inside because they got some dudes on the inside too, including Bryson Eason and a lot of these other talented players. It's huge for Tennessee. Tennessee knows that this offensive line is a weakness right now. They will be in attack mode just from the jump of this game. Can Ohio State handle it? Can they make sure that they are playing the best offensive line football they've played since some of those injuries have hit? And if they don't, then a lot of questions will start to pile up around there in Columbus. And then for Tennessee, you got to hit the deep ball. That is the one thing that will keep Tennessee from, they could possibly go on and win a national title if this finds itself, because then they can play every single game you could possibly want them to play, whether it's in the mud and having to run the ball and play defense to win a game, or play a little bit of a track meet, because they have the dudes to play a track meet. They have the guys to absolutely play a track meet, and they do have a couple of injuries at the wide receiver position heading into this one. Sounds like Dante Thornton will be okay. Sounds like Squirrel White and Brew McCoy is a little bit more up in the air, but at the end of the day, Dylan Sampson, the running back, is going to be the star of this show, as he should. He is the best player on this team. He's the best running back he's the best offensive player for sure on this team. You got to hit a couple. This Ohio State back end, particularly Denzel Burke, really struggled against that talented group against Oregon. This is going to be the best group that they've faced since then. So can Tennessee get behind him? Then can Nico hit the guys when they're open? He has really struggled with that, and it's kept Tennessee from winning the Arkansas game. It's kept them from blowing out a team like Alabama or blowing out a couple of these other teams that they've really struggled with. They could pull away if they're able to hit a couple of these balls, especially in a game where Ohio State's going to be reaching a little bit, they're going to be worrying a little bit. You hit a deep ball early, some of these fans are going to get really nervous, and the boos might start coming out a little bit earlier than they're ready for. But it's going to be an incredible weekend. There's a lot of different X factors as we head into this thing. You know, Kevin Jennings' legs is going to be a huge part of that, as Anthony was talking about, and it'll be really interesting to watch it unfold. There's no doubt about that. That Clemson running back situation is going to be fascinating to watch, how they approach it. Is it just going to be Phil Mafah having to tough it out, or do they have the guys on the back end that they feel confident about moving forward? So it'll be interesting to watch, no doubt about it. But let's take our third break here. And when we come back, we got to talk about just the first round questions. As we head into this weekend, what are a lot of the questions we have? How big of a role will home field advantage play with a lot of the different kind of weird things around it with the CFP? What are the top offensive players, top defensive players to watch? And what would happen to Ryan Day if they go down this upcoming weekend? We'll talk about it all on the other side of this break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the X factors for all of the teams as they head into this weekend. What is the thing that I have a question about, or will just be the deciding factor of what they do this upcoming weekend, whether they lose or win? But let's talk about some of the questions as we go into this weekend, because there's a million things to talk about, and what we'll start with is something that kind of made headlines throughout this weekend. It's the home field advantage. How big of a role will the home field advantage play in this game, in these games this upcoming weekend? Because there's a lot of different things to consider here. Obviously, snow is going to be one of them. It sounds like we're going to get a little bit of snow tonight. It is kind of coming down up there in South Bend right now. Obviously, it won't affect Indiana quite as much as some other teams, but absolutely, that downfield passing game that we just talked about could be impacted by this weather. So definitely something to watch there. So that is one factor. The cold will be another factor. I don't think it's quite as much as some people are making it out to be. A lot of the Ohio State fans and Penn State fans are making it out to be. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they'll be able to really take advantage of that. But when I see Tennessee, I see a cold weather team. So I'm not super worried about them. SMU, a little bit different for sure. So definitely something to watch there. But definitely doesn't feel like the biggest impact in the world. The one issue that I do have with this entire thing is the entrance that was announced probably about a week ago, maybe a couple of days ago, when they were talking about how even if you're a away team, you're going to have a home-like entrance. So they're going to take over stadium operations, the CFP is, and going to give these teams, what they want as they run into the stadium. That's insane. What are we doing? What are we talking about? This is a home field advantage. It's got to be a home field advantage from the start of the day to the very end of the day. It's going to be a different atmosphere. I'm not necessarily here to tell you that it's not going to matter and people aren't going to care and these atmospheres aren't going to be incredible. They're going to be awesome. There's going to be maybe some crowds that aren't quite as packed as you would imagine with the scheduling that's going on, and I think that just opens up for a little bit more affordable ticket pricing, but that's beside the point. But you will have the whiteout. You will have a lot of people really excited for Texas and for SMU and for all these different teams that are trying to get that very first CFP win. So it's going to be awesome. There's no doubt about that. They will play a factor. Maybe those entrances will be a little bit more tempered down than we want them to, but at the end of the day, once that game gets going, the home field advantage will play about as big of a factor as pretty much every other home game in the entire college football calendar. Then the top offensive players to watch, and we talked about him a little bit in the last segment. We got to talk about him again. Elijah Surratt, he is huge. He is a guy that can totally change this game, and you add him to Omar Cooper, you add him to Miles Price. They got wide receivers. That is not Indiana's problem by any means. They have running backs. They have offensive line. They have the quarterback. They got to be able to do it against the elite talent. That is the point of all of this. That is the point of the CFP, and that's what Indiana's trying to take advantage of. It feels like in this game they don't have a ton of matchup advantages except for that one, except for Elijah Surratt against this back end. And if they can find it enough times, then number 13 could be the story as we get into Saturday, or as we get into tomorrow when we get into the other games. Jeremiah Smith, this is the guy. This is the guy you just have to trust throughout the rest of the season. I know he's a freshman, I know he's a young kid, and I know this is going to be unlike anything he's played in front of before. He's your best player. He's the guy that can make all the difference in the world. He is the guy that can totally change what this offense is capable of. So throw it up to him. Don't even draw up a play for everyone else. Just draw him going straight down the field and throw it up to him. Because do that 4 or 5 times a game, you're probably going to get 3 or 4 catches. The dude is absolutely incredible, and he's absolutely someone that the pass game is not going to be elite from Ohio State at this point. It's not going to be terrifying. It's not going to be Oregon level. They can make the big plays, and it's going to start with number 4, and he's going to be a huge player to watch this upcoming weekend against that back end of Tennessee that has some holes in it. Jamal McCoy's a problem, but just about everyone else you can definitely attack on that back end. And then Quintravion Wisner. We talked about the red zone issues for the Texas offense. This is the guy that can fix a lot of them. This is the guy that can get downhill, that can get that run game going, and get the time of possession leaning in Texas' favor. When that happens, it's going to be a really, really good day for Texas. That defense is far, far too good that if that run game gets going and Quinn Ewers' mistakes go down, there's almost no way they're going to lose this Clemson game or maybe just about any other game the rest of the way. If that run game shows up for the next 4 games, Texas is going to be a really, really hard out in this tournament. Then the defensive side of the ball, why not? We'll go to Abdul Carter first. He has 10 sacks on the year, and he's going to be the nightmare for Kevin Jennings. We talked about possibly spying him with Anthony here, and Kobe King could do that. Abdul Carter could absolutely do that as well. He's super athletic, played middle linebacker last year. They moved him over to the pass rusher position because of how aggressive he was, because of how incredible he was rushing the passer in. He's proven that to be the right choice, but he's going to be huge on those read options. If Kevin Jennings pulls, can Abdul Carter be there waiting for him, or is he going to crash down on Brashard Smith and then Kevin Jennings is out the door? So a hugely important player along with every other edge rusher and linebacker for this team, watching Kevin Jennings' legs throughout this one. TJ Parker, he is the guy that can do what Jalen Walker did to Texas the first time around. He is the guy that can totally change this game and get a couple of sacks, totally get this crowd out of it, and take over this game. That's exactly what Jalen Walker did the first time they played, and if Ewers gives him a couple of sacks that he gave Jalen Walker, it's going to be a really tough day for this Texas offense, and TJ Parker is going to be the main reason that's a tough day. And then you got Kobe Wilson. This is a remarkably talented linebacker for the SMU Mustangs, and he's going to have to deal with that Penn State run game all day long. It's going to be an absolute nightmare for him to deal with, but he doesn't miss a lot of tackles. He's a very experienced, very sound player, and he's one of those guys that absolutely can make a difference. If he makes this Penn State offense struggle, especially with that run game, and you put the ball in Drew Allar's hands, not saying he's not capable of that, I think he is, but maybe a couple of mistakes come, and maybe that's all you need if you're SMU. Then we move on to the matchup of the weekend, and we'll start with a Clemson pass game against this Texas secondary. For as young as these wide receivers are for Clemson, and Cade Klubnik being the player that is in his second year in the offense, but definitely one of those guys that has been a little bit boom or bust this year. This offense in general really has been a little bit boom or bust this year. They've been able to hit big plays. Bryant Wesco, TJ Moore, Antonio Williams, they've been absolute problems, especially that Antonio Williams against Jalen Gilbo matchup. That's definitely one to watch throughout this one because that's their slot receiver. That's a very talented guy out of the slot. A guy in Jalen Gilbo, that very good defender, no doubt about it, can be attacked a little bit. When you go after him one-on-one, it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Definitely a huge one, and if they can't hit those big plays over the middle of the field, this Clemson offense might get stagnant pretty quickly. The Penn State run game against the SMU linebackers. This might be two of the best duos in the entire tournament, if I'm being totally honest. When you talk about Nick Singleton and Katron Allen, it's about as good of a running back duo as you will see in this entire thing, other than when you go up to Columbus, Ohio. But at the end of the day, then you have on the other side, you have Kobe Wilson and Ahmad Walker at linebacker, probably the two best duos. It's going to be incredible to watch them go at it this upcoming weekend, and whoever wins that battle is probably going to win this game, if I had to imagine. If those linebackers can slow down that duo, it's going to be a really long day for this Penn State offense. If that running back duo can create problems for those linebackers, SMU is going to get run out of the building. I can almost promise you that. And then the Tennessee O-line against this Ohio State pass rush. We've talked so much about the Ohio State O-line, and for good reason. It's a huge matchup where they seem to be on the wrong side of it. Tennessee could be on the wrong side of this matchup as well. This Tennessee O-line, while very solid, not necessarily elite. They've had a couple of moments throughout the year where it's been a little bit tough to protect Nico. That's kind of led to a couple of the issues that they've had. They've been really good run blocking. Sometimes pass pro has gotten in the way just a little bit. So Jack Sawyer, JTT, all of these guys, Sonny Styles, who can make the big time play? Can they get after this passer? And if they can they explode the game the way that the Tennessee D-line is hoping they can? And then we got to talk about this guy. I hate to do it, but we do have to talk about what happens if Ohio State falls this weekend, because that's what pretty much everyone around the country is wondering. Will this be the last game that Ryan Day coaches as the Ohio State head coach? It's a fair one to ask, and I think the answer is rather clear. If they lose, I would have to imagine that he is gone. I have them losing. I tend to believe he will be fired on Sunday. I hate to say it, if I'm being totally honest, because the reality is there's a lot of different questions as you get into the coaching search for this one. First of all, Ryan Day's a good coach. I get it. He's at Ohio State. These certain parameters that you have to meet are different up there in Columbus than they are everywhere else. He is a very good head coach. He has gotten to a national title. He's gotten to the playoff a number of times. He has won the Big Ten. He has done a lot of the great things around Ohio State. He doesn't have done that as consistently as he needed to. Everyone understands that. He understands that probably better than anyone in the world. But the reality is, who's the replacement that you're going to find? Who's the guy that you feel overly confident in is going to come in and be outright better than Ryan Day? Because a lot of the options that you have out there, Marcus Freeman has signed an extension. Luke Fickell has signed an extension. Matt Campbell signed an extension. Kurt Cignetti signed an extension. What are you going to do? Who are you going to go out and get? Is it going to be just Mike Vrabel and you're going to roll the dice with an NFL guy? Are you going to try to go get a smaller coach that possibly takes over? Are you going to upgrade Brian Hartline to be the head coach? There's a ton of different questions. Even after you fire the head coach, you know that it's not going to be Ryan Day going forward. I don't know who it's going to be, and I can't promise that it's going to be better than Ryan Day. So the question of, what will happen to him after this game seems relatively clear. It feels like he is going to get fired. It feels like there's not really another question about that. What happens after that is a huge question, especially who you hire, because I can't promise they're going to be better than Ryan Day in any respect. So a lot of questions around that, but I think we all know what's coming on Sunday if Ohio State loses on Saturday. Then we have to talk about which would be the most impactful upset, which would be the one that would totally change up the college football world. For Tennessee, we know the impact on Ohio State. We know what would happen there. But for Tennessee, this would be maybe the final key that unlocks this program that is very capable of being elite on a national level every single year. They have all the resources you could possibly want. I believe they have a head coach that's going to be there for a very long time and going to be very successful for a very long time. And they're starting to develop a defense that's not going anywhere for quite a while. So I really like this group, and I think an upset over Ohio State moving on to play Oregon could send them on a path that it's going to be really hard for teams to knock them off. For Clemson, this is a transitory time. You're going through a lot of different things. You're going through dipping into the portal for the first time. You're going into, NIL and a lot of this different stuff a little bit more aggressively than you have in the past. A win would be proof that you didn't necessarily need to do that. You are more than comfortable where you are sitting, but you're willing to add a couple more guys just to make this a little bit better, just to make this a little bit more aggressive, and just on top of that, it would add a lot of questions over there in Austin, Texas, but more importantly for Clemson, it would definitely be validation for a lot of the people that have said this system won't work, you won't be able to win at a high level with these players. He might just be able to on Saturday. Indiana, for tonight, it would be a huge one. It would change the dynamic of football programs for a ton of kids in that area because the reality is recruits have a pretty short memory. They don't necessarily remember what happened all the way back in 2012. As upsetting as that is for a lot of us out here, that is a reality on the recruiting trail. If Indiana goes into Notre Dame and gets a win, if they're able to knock off Notre Dame, a lot of the recruits that are looking at Notre Dame above Indiana will flip that in their head. Whether they think about it or not, they absolutely will, and it could change the way that Indiana goes about business going forward. Not to mention, Indiana's got some relatively wealthy guys in their donor pool, in their alumni pool, especially one guy in particular down there in Dallas. But at the end of the day, you get this win, a lot of really special things could continue to happen up there at Indiana. And then for SMU, this is a very interesting one because for SMU, it would open up just endless opportunities. This is a very dangerous program down there in Dallas, and we get a lot of people looking for their textbooks pretty quickly, and a lot of very powerful people down there in Dallas. But beyond that, it would change the way that we fill this thing going forward. It would give a lot of help to the ACC and Big 12 arguments. It would give a lot of help to the people that compete in conference titles that don't necessarily win. It would give them a lot of help to possibly get in the field going forward. So beyond even SMU, this could have an impact on what the CFP looks like going forward, and definitely would be a very interesting one to watch. On top of, would add a lot of questions for Penn State and James Franklin, no doubt about that. I don't think he would get fired, but definitely would add quite a few questions. But there's a million questions as we head into this thing. You know, it's going to be a lot of them are answered, and a lot of them that I will not even know that I had as we go into tomorrow, but it'll unfold. It'll be absolutely crazy. I have no doubts, but we'll definitely unwrap it all as it happens on Monday. But let's take our last break here. And when we come back, we got to do a little bit of a weekend wrap up. We'll talk about Carson Beck. We'll do a couple of coaching carousel updates, Diego Pavia's update, a lot of different things on the other side of this break. Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just did a couple of questions as we head into this weekend because there's a whole lot of them. Definitely didn't get all the ones I wanted to off my chest, but got a couple of them. Definitely feel relatively good about it, but let's get into a little bit of a weekend roundup, and let's talk about a lot of the different updates from around the country, and let's talk about the first one here. It sounds like Carson Beck will officially be out for the CFP. This does not come as a surprise to me. It does not come as a surprise to really just about anyone. It is going to be Gunnar Stockton the rest of the way for Georgia, and comes down to everyone else stepping up. Comes down to everyone else in that building being able to play a little bit better football, including obviously Gunnar Stockton and those wide receivers. But overall, a huge loss for Georgia. Definitely sets their path in a weird position, no doubt about that. I still have them winning the title. I had them doing that without Carson Beck, so I feel very confident in this team even without Carson Beck. Definitely does add some questions. There's no doubt about that. But now we got some coaching carousel updates, and we'll start with Dave Clawson over there at Wake Forest. He has stepped down after 11 seasons as the head coach of the Demon Deacons. He is going to step away. He's going to be more in an advisory role going forward for the school. Definitely wants to be around the program, definitely wants to be around the school, but as he said it, he just said he doesn't have it anymore. He doesn't have quite the passion that he once had. A lot of these changes are wearing on a lot of these older coaches, so not necessarily a huge surprise. He does leave with the best winning percentage of any head coach at Wake Forest since they joined the ACC. He was in the top 10 in 2021 and 2022. Really, really good coach. Did an incredible job while he was at Wake Forest. It will be Jake Dickert taking... Oh, excuse me, got one more here. It will be Jake Dickert taking over for him from Washington State. Did a really, really good job this year, obviously, over there at Pullman, and has done a good job really throughout his time. A really, really incredible head coach, and definitely a guy that I feel like fits this position really well. I think he can do a great job with maybe some lesser recruits to a lot of the other people people that will have around him, like Dave Clawson has done really, really well. But it'll be great to have Dave Clawson still in the building for him. Definitely will be a guy that he will bounce off of quite a bit, but I do really love this pick of Jake Dickert, and I think he's going to do a great job in this position. A couple other updates. Sacramento State has made their hire in Brennan Marion. This almost confirms that they have a lot more money than I was thinking they had. In that NIL pool that was reported to be $50 million, I can't say confidently that it is $50 million. I can say pretty confidently that that can be accessed. This is a very big time hire. This is a guy that you don't hire unless you're very confident in your financial standing. So this is a huge hire, and definitely a guy that probably won't be there for too long. Very, very impressive coach, and definitely a guy that will continue to rise in this industry. Michael Vick, a very interesting update from this past week was Michael Vick has interviewed for the Norfolk State job. It would be very, very interesting to watch unfold. Definitely will be a little bit of that Deion style, will be different, no doubt about that, but definitely would be very interesting to watch unfold, and a very, very talented guy. Obviously would be an interesting experiment at the very least. And a couple other little things. Sam Houston State has hired Phil Longo as their new head coach. They just won a game last night. They have a new head coach today. And a couple other things. Indiana has a new OC coming over from the Atlanta Falcons, and Tony Sunseri will be with them throughout the rest of the playoff, but a little bit of a change coming up there at OC. Definitely something to watch there. Moving on to Diego Pavia. He has won his temporary injunction to grant him another season in college football in 2025, and a lot of people were very excited about this. But let's talk about it really quickly. His argument essentially was he was in the junior college in his very first year, went to New Mexico Military Institute before transferring to New Mexico State, and it put him in a position where he couldn't benefit off NIL. He couldn't benefit off a lot of those things. He claims that he can make over $1 million next year, which he absolutely can in NIL, and he feels that he deserves to return for another year. They have decided to agree with that. They feel like that is a fair argument, and I understand where he's coming from. I really do. I don't love this. I think it's a very, very bad idea. I think it sets a very bad precedent, and some of the coaches definitely do agree with me. Steve Sarkisian has come out. He was a JUCO player in his time for 2 years before going to BYU for 2 years. He says it's a really bad idea. How long are we going to let these kids stay at the JUCO level and then bounce up to FBS and have 4 more years to play? It is a dangerous precedent to set. A lot of other guys from the junior college ranks will be coming after the NCAA here pretty soon. If I had to imagine, this opened a can of worms that I'm not sure people wanted to be opened. I really like Diego Pavia. I will very much enjoy watching him in 2025, but you got to draw the line somewhere, and I don't think this is a great precedent to set. I think this is a very dangerous idea, but we'll see what happens after it. We'll see how many other guys come after the NCAA, how many other guys have this argument, and how many other guys get to stay for a little bit longer in the world of college football. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but Dallas Wilson, he has decided to leave his NLI from Oregon. He is making his way down to Gainesville, Florida. This was something we talked about on signing day, saying this definitely could be a possibility of him flipping to Florida before he signed with Oregon. Well, he did it after he signed with Oregon. So a little bit of a crazy roller coaster there, but he has officially changed his mind. A huge pickup for Billy Napier and DJ Lagway and all of the team down there. A big-time player that absolutely could be a factor pretty much day one. The number 4 wide receiver in this upcoming class, and Oregon, they got plenty of wide receivers. I don't think they're hurting too much from this one, but Florida badly needed this one, and definitely a big-time pickup for them. And then we got to talk about this. This is obviously something that has gone around, kind of just the talking points as we head into this weekend, but Cade Klubnik and Quinn Ewers are getting a little bit of a rematch this upcoming weekend. They faced off in 2021 back in the Texas State title when they were both seniors. They were both on their way to Ohio State and Clemson respectively. Quinn Ewers up to Ohio State and then down to Texas after 1 year, but this is crazy. It was a really incredible game the first time I remember watching this one, and there's a little bit more overlap even beyond those two guys. R.J. Mickens, the very talented leader for that safety group at Clemson, he was on Quinn Ewers' team over there at South Lake Carroll. And then Michael Taft, the All-American safety for Texas, was Cade Klubnik's teammate and one of his best friends down there at Westlake. So a lot of craziness between these two teams, a lot of overlap between these two teams, and it'll be really interesting to see what that has, what effect that has, how these guys act pregame, and just how hard Michael Taft is willing to hit Cade Klubnik. I think it's pretty hard, if I had to imagine. If I know anything about Michael Taft, he does not take off for just about anyone in the entire country. So that'll be incredible to watch. That'll definitely be something that will be really, really cool, because these are two very, very talented quarterbacks. These are two guys that absolutely were all over the place during their high school career. they've obviously made it to the highest level of college football, and now they get to face off one more time. It'll be really, really cool. Quinn Ewers obviously wants to right that wrong back in the day, so he'll have a little bit extra motivation going into this one on Saturday. Notre Dame and Indiana, let's do a couple of injury updates here really quickly. For Indiana, Jameer Johnson is back in the lineup, a huge player in the back end of that defense, very badly needed him back in the fray. For Notre Dame, it sounds like Jeremiah Love and Howard Cross, they should be okay to go. They should be ready to roll. A couple other injuries here and there. Obviously, Benjamin Morrison is not a new one. That is definitely one that will have an effect on this game, but not one that is new to Notre Dame. But a lot of guys that seem to be relatively okay to go. Maybe Howard Cross will be a little bit one to watch, to be a little bit limited, but it sounds like Jeremiah Love will be more than fine after getting a little bit dinged up against USC. Penn State and SMU, nothing huge here, if I'm being honest. Nothing necessarily crazy. Earlier in the week, we made the mistake of saying Kevin Winston was a big player in this game. He's not playing in this game. He's been out for quite some time. Totally slipped my mind throughout all the craziness, but yes, he will not be in this game, and other than that, there's really nothing to really speak of here. Not a ton of big-time injuries. A couple of guys that have been out for quite some time for these two teams, but overall, pretty much healthy going into this one in State College. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but no Jay Haynes for Clemson. Sounds like Phil Maffa is a go, but will not be 100%. On the other side, for Texas, Quinn Ewers and Kelvin Banks are moving in the right direction. Sounds like they will be ready to go. Probably not fully 100% for either of those guys either. And then Isaiah Bond. It sounds like he is progressing. Probably will be relatively limited. If he does go out there, I would be a little bit surprised if he is a big-time factor in this game. Definitely a huge loss for that team that Clemson really struggles with after the catch. That's your after the catch guy. So definitely a huge loss there, but they got a couple of guys in Silas Bolden and a couple other guys that could definitely step up big in this one. And then nothing huge here for Tennessee and Ohio State. A couple of wide receivers for Tennessee and Dante Thornton, Squirrel White, Brew McCoy that might not be 100% throughout this one, but a couple of different things to watch for in that respect. A couple of guys in the portal from that wide receiver group, a couple of nursing injuries, so something to watch definitely, but doesn't feel like there's anything that will outright keep anyone out of this game as of right now. And then we got to talk about it. We're moving on to the CFP. We are moving on to the final part of this season. There are 4 teams that are making their CFP debut. There are 6 teams that are looking for their very first win in the CFP. There are 2 teams that are going to get their first win no matter what. There are 2 teams in this upcoming weekend that will find their first win in the CFP, and it's going to be special. It's going to be really, really fun to watch this unfold. It's going to be weird. I cannot promise you that all of these games will be super close. I can't promise you that you will be overly happy with the format at the very end of this thing. I can promise you we'll have a lot of really cool moments. I can promise you we'll have a lot of great matchups, including this weekend and probably tonight if I had to imagine. I can promise you we'll have a lot of incredible things, and enjoy it all. Don't let all of this craziness around the sport with the transfer portal and NIL and a million different things that are wrong with the sport right now. What's right is what's going to happen between the white lines tonight and the next couple of days. It's going to be incredible to watch. If you're watching the NFL on Saturday, it better be on a side TV. Do not give them the respect that they very clearly want. We're taking Saturday back, especially in December. It is now ours. Make sure that you do that. But take it all in. It's going to be weird. It's going to be fun. It's going to be awesome. We will be back here on Monday to break it all down. I can promise you that. But that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference. Also, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all the social pages for all the content and updates you could possibly need. We have great people covering every single sport you could want. So anything in the world of sports you need, come on over to GSMC and we have you totally covered. But thank you once again for tuning in. We will be back on Monday to talk about a bunch of craziness, I have to assume, in the portal and on the field this upcoming weekend, but we'll talk about it all on Monday. Enjoy everything this weekend, and I will see you then.
Mm-hmm.